Racial identity, the experience of 1.5 and second generation Habesha American immigrants. And so to give you just some key terms, when we say Habesha, we're referring to Ethiopians and Eritreans who are in East Africa. When we refer to a 1.5 generation, we're talking about immigrants who have moved here at a young age, by or before the age of 16, and moved to the U.S. And second generation children are those who are naturally born in the U.S. but have parents who are first generation immigrants. And when we refer to the ethno-racial spectrum, we're more talking about the spectrum of how pan-ethnic or mono-ethnic an individual identifies themselves as.
So our research questions is pretty much this. First of all, where do the 1.5 and second generation place themselves on the ethno-racial spectrum? Do they see themselves more pan-ethnic, being Black American or African American? Maybe a little more mono-ethnic, where they go to Habesha American. Maybe they go even further down, going to Eritreans or Ethiopians, or do they go all the way down to what specific tribe their family come from? Second is, in what ways do external forces such as social challenges and support system influence the meanings they give to their identities? Do they hold it with pride or do they hold it with shame? And lastly is, how do these immigrants' sense of belonging influence how they think other people view them? In other words, how do they think other people view them because of their membership to a certain race or to a certain ethnicity?
So to give you some context of the literature we've studied, some of the previous research has found that first generation Habesha immigrants have generally had a history of rejecting association with Black or African American identity, while their offspring, the 1.5 and second generation immigrants, are more likely to have felt some sort of connection and have actually placed themselves on a spectrum that identifies with Black or African American identity. Another thing we found was that these external influences, such as their family, their social networks, their peers, their school environments, their neighborhoods, media portrayals, all these external influences play a huge role on how they are able to view their own self-identity. Another thing was that although first-generation Habesha immigrants have this distinct identity and are to some degree able to feel the discrimination and prejudice that Black and African Americans have felt over the years, the reason new generations of Habesha Americans, meaning 1.5 and second generation, are more likely to relate to them is because they were raised in this country as Americans as well, not only Habesha, so they have this sense of affinity with the two identities as well.
So the methodology we decided to use with snowball sampling was photo voice. So during our photo voice, we essentially asked our participants to take 1 to 2 photos of each of the following themes. 1, how do they think other people view them? 2, what are the challenges they face because of their ethno-racial identity? 3, what support system do they have to keep them moving on and resilient? And lastly, how would they like to represent their ethno-racial identity in 1 to 2 photos?
Now, just so you know, our research is currently in progress, so we're hoping to develop more on what we have now. But to give you some context of the participant demographic information, the age average was about 39 for our participants, although it varies. And we had mostly female participants, which we're hoping to improve on, because we only had 2 males. And most of our participants were 1.5 generation, which found out to be interesting in our findings, and most of our participants lived in California, which we'd like to expand to more national in the future. An interesting and sort of limitation that we found was that most of our participants actually ethnically identified as Ethiopian, which means we weren't able to have many Eritrean participants, which is something, again, we're trying to build on in the future. And although it was against our literature review, we found it interesting that most of the participants who ethnically identified as Ethiopian, there were still 2 people who identified as Ethiopian American, and we thought that was interesting because those were actually 1.5 generations, not second generation, so we thought they would have more of a affinity towards just Ethiopian ethnic identity. And in regards to racial identity, 3 of our participants identified as Ethiopian instead of Black or African American, and one of those participants specifically said to not identify themselves as African American, and even racially, they would rather prefer to call themselves Black Ethiopian or just Ethiopian rather than being called African American. And one of our participants who racially identified as Ethiopian was a second generation. So that's kind of interesting because it goes against our literature that assumed he would have more of an affinity towards being Black or African American.
So these are some of our emerging findings that we have so far. The first being ethnic blindness, where whenever they talk to someone, the other party will see them as Black rather than seeing them for their ethnic identity, regardless of whichever one they feel a stronger affinity towards. Which is also interesting because Habesha Americans don't face the same historical conflicts as what you would think of an African American. They were never enslaved and forced over to America. So because of that, some African Americans view them as an outgroup. And likewise, some Habesha Americans also view Black Americans as an outgroup because they can't understand what that's like, which sometimes causes them to have a stereotypical view of African Americans thanks to the media. And one of our participants had a theory as to why ethnic blindness is frequent, is that she believes people mystify and have more of an allure towards white European ethnicity. So let's say if someone goes, hey, hi, I'm French, they'll be like, oh, I've been to France, or oh, what was French like? But then if one of the participants went, oh, I'm Ethiopian, they'd be like, oh, yeah, you're from Africa, and conversation ends there. There's no, what was Ethiopia like, or hey, I've been to Ethiopia, or anything. So this is one of the pictures that the participants took when I asked her what was a challenge. This right here is a chawa, which is an Ethiopian fly swatter made from horsehair. I had no idea what it was until I met her and saw that picture. And what she said was, yeah, and I thought I put this as a challenge because not a lot of people know about Ethiopian culture. So whenever someone comes into my room and sees all my Ethiopian things, they just look at it weird and scrunch their noses. African Americans squint at it too. The race doesn't really seem to matter. No one really knows about Ethiopian culture. So because they see something odd or they couldn't understand, they're just like, wait, what's that? And I asked her specifically, I'm like, oh, but African Americans probably get it, right? And she's like, no, they don't get it either. Which shows that ethnic blindness isn't just racially outgroup, it's ethnically outgroup, where other African Americans might not even understand all of each other's specific ethnicities.
So another theme that we found across our participants was this theme of diversity, and this comes in 2 different parts. The first being a sense of foreignness that they feel to the host country, that being America. This was mostly found amongst 1.5 generations. They found that when they immigrated here, they had to adapt to a brand new world, a new set of cultures, a brand new language that they had to learn, a new set of social norms and expectations that they were expected to understand. And on top of that, they're stepping into a society that has this pre-existing racial hierarchy that they now have to just be a part of, that didn't exist in their native country at all. And so although they have all of these distances from the country, from America, they also have these foreign characteristics that they carried with them from their foreign country, such as their accents, their culture, their traditions, their habits, the foods they eat. And so that was sort of what our participants said in regards to feeling foreign to their country, to the U.S. But in regards to feeling close to the U.S., a lot of second generations especially reported feeling and understanding with a lot of important American cultures that usually wouldn't be acknowledged in their ethnic culture. Examples of this are high school proms, certain holidays, things like that. And one of our participants, when asked about the challenges and struggles of being an immigrant, only could really reference his parents in regards to that because he viewed himself as more of a first-generation American citizen as opposed to a second-generation immigrant from Ethiopia. And so that was interesting. So this is a photo from one of our participants who traveled to Ethiopia with his family. And the girl on the left is his daughter, and the little girl on the right is a girl that they met at a historical site. And he has this to say about the photo. What it means? Well, it means a lot to be Ethiopian, you know. I wanted to show the generation back home versus here and how different they are. And I don't mean how different they look, but how different they dress, you know. First of all, we're all the same. We're all human, but second, culture. It's a difference in flavor. Well, it shows your culture. I don't want it to separate us, but flavor. It shows that we like our culture, our flavor. And so what he's really talking about here is just the diversity that comes in being Ethiopian, because both of these little girls have the same amount of Ethiopian heritage in them, but they're coming from completely different backgrounds, and even their appearance you can tell is different. His daughter's wearing more Western clothing, and the girl on the left is wearing ethnic Ethiopian Habesha clothing. And so this just really pushes on how diverse we can be while being the same background.
So our next thing that I asked them is about media representation. So first I asked them, okay, how do you feel the media represents you? And they say violent, poor, uneducated. And strangely, despite the fact that they're declared to be lazy, they're also violent. Go figure how that works. And this message is unfortunately spread through conversation when someone's going, oh yeah, did you watch that one show yesterday with that stupid black person? They were so funny. And unfortunately, for some people who might not talk to African Americans much, that's the image that they're gonna get. So then I asked them, okay, how would you like to be represented? Unsurprisingly, not what's mentioned above. What they want is more of a nuanced view. They're not saying that they are perfect human beings. They want negative and positive traits shown as well. So one of the best ways to do that, first of all, is get rid of the token characters. Don't tell me 1 to 2 characters can represent an entire race. That's just not going to happen. You can't capture all their personality and culture in that. But it's not just the personality and culture they talk about. It's also even the skin pigmentation. Not every African American have the same skin pigmentation. So they wanted a variation of that as well. So this was from Brother Bear when we were talking about animation. He said, actually that's really good that you brought it up. I love watching animation, whether it's cartoon or anime. If you watch like the whole Avatar, you know, the Africans or Eskimos, but like, yeah, everyone wanted to be part of the water tribe, at least from the people that I know of. Like some people might want to be in the fire, but mostly everyone wanted to be in the water tribe. So in this show, there's pretty much an entire civilization of dark-skinned people. And it was the first time that, at least for me personally, as a child, I got to see not just 1 or 2, but an entire group of cast being dark-skinned. And they were shown that they have positive characteristics. They were strong, they were resilient, they loved their family. But you also got to see some of them were sexist. Some of them had class discrimination. Some of them believed that girls were weak. But yet, despite that, people wanted to be part of the water tribe because they were diverse. You can find yourself in one of these characters somewhere. And at the end of the day, I think that's what they want. They want a more nuanced view of both good and negative traits.
And so another thing that a lot of our participants talked about heavily was the idea of family, especially family as influencers. A lot of our participants talked about how their parents were their first introduction to an ethno-racial identity. This is evident in a couple of examples. Peach, one of our participants, explained how her father used to teach her every Sunday about her ethnic background by teaching her the Ethiopian alphabet every day. Lightning and Abi are 2 participants who were taught the intersection of racial and ethnic identities as children and are now able to do so as parents for their children and even teach them the language of Amharic. Certain parents have to deal with culture clashes and have to sort of work with communicating in order to balance out the American and ethnic cultures. For example, the appropriate age to start dating, whether certain celebrations of holidays are appropriate, like Halloween or Groundhog Day. But another thing was that family was found as a great support system, especially in regards to having friendly sibling rivalry or competition that helps to motivate and inspire each other. or just having someone to bounce ideas off of or get advice from, especially in regards to their identity. This is another photo from Lightning where he's talking about how, his family in Ethiopia, and he's saying, we help each other out and cheer each other on and definitely pull each other upward. If one of us is successful, then we make sure the other ones are also taken care of. We talk about it, we share it, it matters to us like any other family. Like any other family, we work as a team, so without family support to look after, nothing really. It's hard to accomplish anything. If I have to rank it, number one, it is the most important support as human beings. We need humans, especially those close to you. Someone who knows you well and who you know well. Our mind needs that support. And so he's really just emphasizing here the strong support system that family is and how it's just a pillar to lean on, not just in your ethno-racial identity, but in your daily life.
So, we also found out other support systems that was outside the family. One of it was already touched on, fictional characters that are similar to them. Another is also non-fictional people, historical figures who have went through adversities that they have. And seeing them overcome these adversities can also help inspire them. There's also organizations such as churches for religions, book clubs, or Mahabir, which is an ethnic group made of arbitrage meant to work as a social connections and also just to help each other out. And lastly, friends. So this is what Bella had to say. If I'm going through something, I read that and I go, wow, if they can go through that, then there's no reason for me to not be able to go through that as well. So many of the authors of these autobiographies overcome so many of the challenges and they make the best of themselves despite whatever they face. So it takes my mind to a different place and time frame, which can be really impactful for those days. I love to read. So this is talking back to me talking about historical figures or even non-fictional autobiographies. They can serve as a role model, knowing that these people exist and have done all these great things. What I find really fascinating is, back in my class, whenever we talk about role models, we talk about it in terms of children. Children need the role model. Bella's an adult, and she still needs them. She still needs to know other people have done this, and that helps motivates her. So I think that's also part of the importance of role model is that they're not suddenly gone once we're adults. We still need them in our lives. We need inspiration.
So our last 2 points sort of flow well together, but the first of the 2 is agency. Believing that education is the key to agency is something that all of our participants touched upon to some degree or another. They believe that social and economic mobility is powered by education, and that in order to understand more about the world and how you are able to change it, you have to have an educational background and mindset in order to do that. They believe that agency helps you to create social spaces like she was talking about, having a mahabir or a book club or a church group in order to strengthen your ethnic identity. And this helps to promote your ethnic identity, not just for yourself, but also for future generations, for the children also. They understood that there are challenges that they face due to their racial and ethnic background, but they're able to combat these to a certain degree, with a certain amount of agency. So this is from Bella as well. She's talking about, she gave her award that she got at graduation to display her sense of agency. I won't share the entire quote just because we're running out of time, but what she's pretty much talking about here is how she was able to find it within herself to persevere despite any racial or economic disadvantages and be able to come out on top and have not only a graduate degree, but to have it with honor. And so this is just a huge display of her perseverance. Resilience is our final theme that we found, believing that the only limit that exists is yourself and that you are the key to your own success, which really plays along well with agency because in order to understand where you are, you have to be aware of where you are in the racial hierarchy and in the social system that you're in order to become more vocal about these stereotypes that are facing you. Again, working multiple jobs while taking college classes, being a super mom, all of these different things are trends that we found throughout our participants because they do this in order to remain resilient for their children. And probably the most important and impactful thing that we learned was that they all had a sense of ethnic pride and identity in themselves. And this was sort of evident in wearing cultural clothing in public spaces, wearing cultural jewelry like I am, or eating your food even in public spaces. And the final photo that we have here is from a participant who is so ethnically prideful that she chose the new Prime Minister of Ethiopia as her code name, Abiy. And the photo that she chose is during a speech that the Prime Minister of Ethiopia was giving. A man held up a flag in the middle of the speech in Masqal Square in Addis Ababa. And she says, I think that gentleman captures what a lot of Ethiopians view when they think of Ethiopia, and that's just pure freedom. Just being able to hold that flag means so much. You know, it embodies history, it embodies winning a war, it embodies religion, and embodies culture. So that's what's going on in that picture. I mean, it's a single man with one flag on a stick, but it holds a lot of meaning. And what she's really touching on here is that even if you're a part of the diaspora and you're not in the home, you can still perform ethnic pride by following up on the news, following up on what's going on in your country, and having this sense of ethnic pride within ethnic isolation in America. So that's all. Thank you.